Yo, what is up everyone? Back here with another video. In today's video, we're going to be breaking down all the returning Pokemon in the Scarlet and Violet DLC, the Teal Mask. So I'm really excited for this video because I do think that it's going to have some significant ramifications on the current format that we have. I know that obviously there's a little bit of fatigue because the format has really kind of stagnated within Regulation D for some people. So I do think that these options, even though they won't severely impact the metagame where they're going to like change up everything, I do think they'll add some like nice tools to take advantage of that could potentially like make some metagame shifts, right? So the first thing I wanted to talk about was I'm going to focus on obviously different sections and kind of go through it one by one. So first I wanted to talk about the starters. So the starters are returning. It's not on this list for some reason, so I need to put it separately. But the reason why it's really significant that all these starters are returning is because two of them have like a significant enough niche where you could potentially see them being used. I think that Empoleon out of any of them have more of a niche, right? Right now, Chi-Yu Flutter is a very oppressive like kind of core that's doing super well, and I could see Empoleon being one of those Pokemon that like is like a rare like pick that actually ends up working versus it. Now, the one thing that's really important to note, I'm actually going to move back to a previous year so we can just see Empoleon's general moveset. Obviously, it's going to be a bit different, but let's go to 19. Okay. So let's look at Empoleon's moveset, right? So obviously it's going to have some different moves, we would assume, right? It's going to have access to Terra Blast, it's going to have some other stuff. But essentially, the one thing that's really interesting about Empoleon is that it does get a really good typing for dealing with both Flutter Mane and for dealing with opposing Chi-Yu, right? So for example, it can run something like Hydro Pump, right? And then it can also run Flash Cannon to deal with both of them. The physical set with Defiant isn't really that strong because honestly, like its attack set isn't really anything spectacular. So it's not really something that you'd want to like kind of invest into. But I think that it definitely has the potential with a, Hydro Pump Flash Cannon set to be able to do some work, right? And then the Terra Fairy that you would give it in theory, right? I'm going to go back here so we can give it Terras, right? Terra Fairy could be really good, so you can sit in front of Iron Hands more comfortably and use it as like a bulky Watermon. They really need to give this thing competitive, by the way. I think if they give this thing competitive, it's like perfect. But yeah, I just think it could be cool. Its special defense isn't like super low either, so if you theoretically invested into it, you could maybe sit in front of a Chi-Yu Flutter. If you ran Assault Vest, of course, you could do that. You could just theoretically lead this into it. But, Iron Hands exists, so it's not like this is just a one mon beats all. I just thought it was, like, kind of a neat Pokemon that could have a niche, right? Also, being able to hard wall Goldingo and being able to pressure Heatran is really cool. I think that's something that's really unique about it that you can take advantage of with an AV set. That being said, right, it's all theoretical until we really get to see it. Now, Infernape's a really interesting one for me as well because I think that Infernape has a really good niche as a fast fake out option. And also in this format, having a fast close combat and having a like feint as an option is really cool next to like some attackers like Flutter. You get access to like strong moves like Overheat. You also get Flare Blitz. You can run a Sash on it. There's just some cool stuff that Infernape can do. Now, don't get me wrong. I think the one issue that Infernape will have is its speed tier is a little bit mediocre. I just think that the fake out niche is something that hasn't really been filled by like a really good fake out mon. And Infernape's not the only fake out mon I'm going to be talking about actually in this video. Now, Torterra is probably like the one that's like the least like whoa about like the rest of it. That being said, it doesn't have like the worst stat pool. Let's say theoretically you used it in Trick Room, right? You could have like a Trick Room Torterra, right? The problem is like if you see here its stats aren't like phenomenal, and then it's competing with like something like Ursaluna, so it's like why would I use this over Ursaluna, for example, right? So I feel like it would be a bit of like bias of being like, yeah, I just love Torterra, that like is the reason I would use it, that being said, Torterra was actually my first starter, so I definitely have a bit of an attachment to it, but yeah, I could I could see this one probably being the most underwhelming of all of them. But I think that in general, the Empoleon, right, and the Infernape are the two more interesting of the starters that were added. So the next Pokemon I want to talk about quickly is Alolan Sandslash. Alolan Sandslash isn't really that impressive to me. I'm going to talk about Snow in general because obviously Ninetales and Alolan Sandslash go well together. So the main problem I think with like this kind of combination is that when it comes to the Sandslash and a Ninetales, like you get a speed boost on your Sandslash and it can pressure opposing like Flutter, but realistically, like what is your Sandslash doing to like a Chi or like another like water type? Now you could argue like okay, but if it has like Iron Head, because it does get Iron Head, right? Iron Head, Icicle Crash, Terra Blast Water, or if it has like Liquidation or something, then it can use that, right? You run like a Clear Amulet, like potentially I could see it maybe pressuring Chi-Yus a little bit, but it's still not the most insane in terms of special defense, so it'd still be like a little bit pressured, right? As well too, Ninetales, like I think Auroraville is really cool, and I think an Ice Fairy type is super cool, and it's done well in previous formats, but it hasn't really had fairy competition to the extent of Flutter. That being said, though, I think being able to have a fast Auroraville is pretty broken, and it's something that can definitely be exploited a bit better than like Abomasnow could, for example, because Abomasnow just dies a Chiyu, right? Like it doesn't like Chiyu, and like it has more trouble with that. But like Ninetales also has a really good support kit as well, so you could do like Encore, right? You have stuff like Roar, although Roar is probably not really relevant in this case, but you just have some generally cool options, right? And I think that's just like kind of a neat aspect of it. So the next team I want to talk about, or like weather, is Rain. So I think Rain got a huge buff by getting Politoed because in general, right, you have a Pokemon that's a lot better Rain setter in terms of bulk. And you can use it now, like Rain can be more flexible and you can kind of pick the setter that's better for you. Poliwrath is one of the new Rain Dance abusers, so like Swiftslowing Moms added in. Moms? Did I just say moms? I meant to say mons. I am terrible at abbreviating apparently. But don't mind me, by the way. I have like no rest right now. Like I got like 3 hours of sleep. I'm going to bed early today, but like yeah, I wanted to get a video done for you guys. So yeah, no, definitely need definitely need some sleep. But yeah, so like I think Poliwrath is really interesting because obviously you get a new like Rain Abuser. I don't think there's any other Rain Abusers that were added here. So like that besides that, like you're not gonna really see too many other mons that are like, wow, you know, they like Rain got a huge buff. But I mean, hey, you get a water fighting type that isn't Urshifu, right? So like I feel like you should probably just use Urshifu, but if you really wanted a Swift Swimmer that had the same type and different moves, there you go. But I do think that the more relevant one is going to be Politoed. Politoed has a lot of good support moves. It lost Scald, obviously, so I think that like Hydro Pump could be really good. I think Parasong is pretty decent as like a kind of like late game cleaning option. Oh wait, I remember the other rain setter, Ludicolo. I almost totally forgot. But yeah, anyways, I'll get to that. But it also gets Encore, gets a bunch of other support moves that are really cool, Helping Hand. Ludicolo is super cool because the Water Grass typing actually allows it to hit a lot of Pokemon. Notably, it does get hard walled by Iron Hands, which is probably going to be a bit of an issue for it. But at least Ludicolo can be a beneficiary of Terra as well. Like if you're running like Terra Fairy, you could use it to hit Iron Hands. Maybe if you run like a different Terra type that's like a little more niche or like fits kind of a like what you want to get out of it, like even Poison as a more defensive type, that could be kind of cool because then you you know, have ways to beat opposing like Urshi Waters. And then if you run Terra Fairy, for example, you could beat like Urshi Darks. Like just a couple different ideas, but generally, right, like the main thing that like Ludicolo provides is like another weather abuser that, you know, might have more like variety or give more variety to Rain. So that's kind of cool. Now, in terms of that, like that's mostly it for weathers. I'll quickly talk about Ninetales, and then there was one more Chlorophyllmon added, which was Victory Bell. Victory Bell shouldn't really have too much of an impact in the metagame if I were to guess. Ninetales obviously has Drought, which is a really big deal because, you know, you can obviously set it up. That being said, Ninetales stats are really bad, so it's usually not really popular. The only situation or reason you'd have to use it over Torkoal is if you wanted a fast Sunsetter, and then you also wanted to use it in like a more supportive route next to like a stronger like Sun attacker, right? So like for example, like a Sunmon like Lilligant, like it wouldn't care that it got this addition, but something like Venusaur, which might get added in the future, and I guess Victory Bell in this case, right, like could theoretically benefit, right? Now the problem is obviously with like Victory Bell stats aren't, or Victory Bell, I think it is Victory Bell, but like basically like its stats aren't like super phenomenal for like what it wants to do, and like most of the time you want to run as a special attacker even though its attack is higher. This is like one of those mons that like desperately needs a rework. So but it's like fine, you get fast sleep powder, right? So it's like, you know, you get something out of it. Actually double check the moves on it. It does get sleep powder, I think. If it doesn't get sleep powder, then this thing's cooked. Okay, it doesn't even get sleep powder, so never mind. Yeah, this mon is just bad. I'm happy to correct myself if I'm wrong. Golem won't make a big like a big splash in my opinion. Alolan Golem won't make a big splash either. These are just two mons that are weak to Iron Hands. Now Weezing is a really interesting one. I do think both Weezings have a lot of potential. Now I think that they kind of offer different things. So Weezing Galar offers kind of like a hard, like it bodies Ursh, like it bodies Urshi Dark. And Shanpao probably doesn't like sitting in front of it because there's just not much. It gets a free Will-O-Wisp off. It can pressure Iron Hands. I think it's actually really cool for what it can do. It also gets access to Strange Steam, which is really cool. It gets access to, you know, Will-O-Wisp. And you can utilize it in a really supportive route that can like even turn off abilities. I don't know if it turns off the Ruinmon abilities. That's what I'm kind of curious about. If it does, That's going to be a really big deal because then you can, you know, obviously exploit that and take advantage of the fact they don't get their ruin mount abilities. You could even, if it turns off photosynthesis, for example, and it ruins a booster energy, then like Scarf Urge plus Weezing could be a really big deal because then obviously you can, you know, turn off a booster speed Flutter and then throw a Surging Strikes out, right? So that's kind of cool. So there are like some neat things here, and regular Weezing just has the benefit of like only having one weakness, right? They obviously always have to run Neutralizing Gas. I don't think there's any reason to run any other ability on this Pokemon, but yeah, like that's just like some cool things that it can do. So overall, it's like a neat Pokemon. I would expect to maybe see like 1 or 2 teams with it. So next up I want to cover is Snorlax. Now, unfortunately, the one thing that's a bit of a problem with Snorlax doesn't necessarily mean it can't be used. Snorlax is just incredibly weak to both Urshis right now. It's like really outpaced in terms of damage. It doesn't like, you can run Belly Drum on it, which was like its main use before. But the main issue that it's gonna have is like it's gonna kind of get outpaced. You could theoretically, if you could get Belly Drum up with Crest, I could see it being really strong. But I could also see it just kind of maybe fading away to, you know, kind of just like abandonment over like the course of like when it gets added, right? Because it's just not exactly the strongest mon. I have seen like Trick Room offensive Snorlaxes in previous formats that have had like, you know, Brave like max attack, and then their choice band, and then maybe like Terra Normal, or they have Explosion or Self Destruct, I guess in this case, or like Double Edge. Like that's some cool stuff, but most of the time I probably wouldn't like, you know, expect that. Furret's another follow me mon, but honestly, like Furret is just so bad. Like you would be better off using a DD or anyone else. So I wouldn't even worry about it. Now, one mon I did want to talk about, which I did skip over, and this is really important, is Clefairy. So Clefairy is really important because Clefairy actually enables a lot of different offensive Pokemon, and Friend Guard also allows them to kind of just sit there really comfortably, right? So not only do you have Friend Guard, which protects like these other Pokemon that you can have next to the Clefairy, but also too, the really cool thing that it operates, or like it does, is it has access to a lot of support moves, Helping Hand, Follow Me, like Life Tube. Like it does some really cool stuff. And then with Terra, you know, you can make it even more annoying with like a Follow Me, and then Eviolite gives it a lot of bulk as well. Now, obviously, like its stats don't look super impressive, but once you add up the Eviolite and everything else, it actually does start like, you know, actually taking some big hits, right? Also, something to hard beat Urshi Dark is really cool on this team, in my opinion. Or like on teams in general, and it can also like annoy Iron Hands if it has like a secondary good defensive Terra, right? Even sitting in front of Gold, maybe if it's Terra Water or something. So that's pretty much it for the Clefairy. And then I'm going to see if there are any other Pokemon here. So the next thing I want to talk about is actually going to be Mamoswine. I don't know why they're separated like that. Oh, I guess they're... Oh, because it's by Pokédex number. I understand. So Mamoswine is a really interesting one because I think Mamoswine actually has a really like interesting niche in every metagame. It has Oblivious, so it's immune to Intimidate, which is a big deal. Then also to factor in that like if you're using it on snow, you can pressure Iron Hands with Mamoswine, right? You can pressure Landorus because it doesn't care with Oblivious about the Intimidate drop. Pressure Hizumi and Arcanine. You pressure Rillaboom. Chien-Pao obviously can like beat you probably, depending on the situation, right? And then Urshis beat you. So like if you can find a way to beat Urshis and Pao and then Chi-Yu, if you could get Tailwind next to Torn actually against Chi-Yu Flutter, you'd probably like straight roll them. So like yeah, that's kind of cool. So it has like some cool tools that you could take advantage of that I could definitely see being good. So Mamo's definitely a Pokemon I'd keep an eye out for that could definitely like shift some things up, especially for Tailwind teams. So Shiftry, is this a Chlorophyll mon actually? Because I think I just kind of ignored it had Chlorophyll. I just don't think it gets anything super significant. We'll take a look at it, but I don't think it really provides anything. I know it gets Fake Out, which is kind of cool, but like I don't think it has any like support moves that it like really needs to give. It does have Fast Icy, and it gets like, I don't know, does it learn Knockoff on level up? Dude, so many Pokemon lost Knockoff. It's actually really tragic. Yeah, there's no knockoff, so like I wouldn't really expect this Pokemon to do too much. So then moving on, Milotic, really good. I mentioned how like competitive would be like really strong when I was talking about Empoleon. Milotic being able to have that competitive boost, especially with Landorus and Hizui and Arcanine in the format. And then also too being able to run like annoying sets like Muddy Water, because it has some like good like stall sets that you can use to win games, like Muddy Water, Recover, Coil, and then Hypnosis. That kind of set can like really endgame certain teams if you like play it properly. There's also like, you know, a more supportive Milotic set that you can use on a team, which is like Muddy Water, Icy Wind, Recover, and Protect. I think it's just like a cool niche. I don't necessarily know if it'll be like the most, common Pokemon ever. But I do think that like being able to actively sit in front of Flutter Chi, like this bulk is definitely not something you can like ignore. So like I could see Milotic actually being a like really big deal, especially too with all the intimidators as well around. Like you could maybe build a cool team around this. Then we have Dusclops. So Dusclops is a really interesting one. I think Dusclops will actually make Trick Room, like hard Trick Room, a little bit better. The problem with hard Trick Room right now is a lot of the setters are just kind of bad. Dusclops has like a lot of significant bulk, and like if you run a good Terra on it, you could potentially make it really hard to stop Trick Room going up. Now, the one thing is that obviously Crest exists, and Crest is really strong. What Clops does different than Crest essentially is a couple different things. First off, it's slower, so and it offers like different support options. So like Will-O-Wisp, it goes for Nightshades to chip things. There are a couple other ways you can use it. Sometimes it's used to activate policies on like your Trick Room mons. So I could definitely see it being like a good secondary Trick Room option. The only main drawback of it is that like obviously the ruins are really good, and then you have Flutter, who can just throw a Shadow Ball at it, so like that's a little concerning. But I think besides that, there is like in Dark Earth, but there's like some cool like ways you can maybe use this Pokemon if you like use it properly, right? I don't know if it gets access to Ally Switch again. If it does, that's kind of a big deal, but we'll see. So then we continue down. We're kind of getting through like most of the Pokemon that I want to talk about. Conkeldurr is like one I'm gonna like quickly go over, but I don't actually think it'll be like too meta relevant. So Conkeldurr is a Pokemon that like is really strong on the physical end, but the problem is right now it's very outclassed by Urshifu. And like what's another good fighting type? Iron Hands, right? So it has steep competition, so I don't think it's gonna see too much competitive play. Unfortunately, something like Chandelure also kind of lost a lot of its merit because if you think about it, right, like Chandelure is a Pokemon that you would want to be using to pressure fire type damage on a lot of teams. A lot of them have Chi-Yu now, A lot of them have Chi-Yu, a lot of them have Flutter. It's just kind of outpaced as a ghost type, so that's a bit problematic. Now, Mienshao is kind of a big deal because I think Inner Focus, first off, is a really good ability. As I mentioned with Infernape, the fast fake out is kind of a big deal as well, right? And then on top of that too, like a fast close combat, you can pressure something like Chi-Yu. You could use Feint with it. It has Wide Guard. It has a cool kit that can enable maybe some more offensive teams. So I wouldn't be surprised to see like Mienshao find some success. Next up I want to talk about is Mandibuzz. So Mandibuzz kind of offers like that tailwind support role. I will say like in more recent formats, it kind of like was slowing down a little bit in terms of usage because there was just so much to outpace it. But I do think that it has a legitimate niche in some cases where like you can utilize it. It also gets Iron Defense if I remember correctly, so you could theoretically just make a bird that like won't die. I like to think of it as like a mini Yveltal, because it's kind of more leaned into the bulk of a Mandibuzz rather than like with something like Galar Moltres is leaning more offensively. Excuse me. Rabambi brings back some speed swap stuff. And speed swap's like kind of neat. So like what you would do is like cute stuff like, oh, I'd go for speed swap onto my Torkoal and like make it go fast, but like nothing like super significant, right? And then the Vikavolt here, right? Vikavolt can be used on Trick Room. It's not like the most super great mon, so I wouldn't really fully expect it to do anything, but I mean it exists, right? Like it's a slow special attacker, it can do some stuff. Ursaluna we already know is in the game. Ursaluna Blood Moon. So Ursaluna Blood Moon's a really interesting one, right? Now this is supposed to be apparently a steel type. We don't know for sure yet, obviously, right? But the nice thing is that you can, obviously get this new form of Ursaluna. Now, we don't know much about the moves yet because obviously we haven't figured it out. There is a new move, but we don't know anything about it yet, and we don't have the stats yet. But if it is a steel and it's a steel and ground type, a couple of things change about it, right? So it does become weaker to certain like Pokemon. So for example, like if you were to use this Ursaluna, you'd be very weak now to ground moves. So like you would lose to opposing Ursaluna, the like regular ones. So like this one would have to have something that can differentiate it from the other like Pokemon, right? And then finally for like the last bit of stuff, like Basculegion is back, which we know. Dipplin, I wouldn't really worry about this. I don't think it's gonna be very good, to be quite honest with you. I mean, if it is, I'll be surprised. And then they have the the different like Poltergeist, and then they have like a Sinisha. Like it's fine, but it's not exactly like the most impressive Pokemon, I'd say. Like its typing is cute, but like it's just one of those Pokemon that like I don't see being very good. Now, Okidogi, Monkey Dory, and Pheasantipity, like I feel like those three could be really good if they're allowed. I don't know if they will be allowed. I would assume maybe not on the first one, but you never know. The cool thing about these Pokemon is that they're all like adding, a good poison types to the format. And poison's like a really interesting type because there's definitely some like interesting ways you can kind of build off of that. Poison Fairy is a really cool type that hasn't really been explored yet. And then also too, there's Poison Fighting, which is really good offensive coverage. And then you have the, Poison Psychic, which you can use actually to put on a lot of pressure against a ton of like opposing teams with your special coverage, right? So I'm gonna be interested to see like kind of how that pans out and how they're utilized. Then we have Ogerpon, which obviously has like different forms. I don't know if it'll be legal. If it is legal, that obviously totally changes things. That being said, to the understanding, right, is like a kind of like elemental, basically like an elemental kind of theme for it. That being said, you are probably like unlikely to see this Pokemon make much waves because of like Flutter being so good, unless it has like some broken ability that it could take advantage of, and we don't know anything about its ability yet, so we'll have to find out more about that. Also, I didn't realize that like such a this is so interesting because it's like its face here is like so like whoa, it's spooky, and then here it's just like very like cutified, I guess. Cutified? I don't even know if that's a word. But yeah, anyways, so that's it for the DLC Pokemon. I think it's incredibly interesting to just kind of go over these Pokemon and like what will change. I definitely think that as well too when we see the format, we'll have a better idea of like how things are going to change. But I do think that like some of those Pokemon I mentioned have significant niches that you could take advantage of. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you guys would like to see more in the future and what you guys would like to see next. Thank you guys for watching. Catch you in the next one. Oh, check out Patreon. Check out coaching down below if you guys are interested in that and interested in supporting the channel more. Take it easy, guys. Peace.